CNN sets traps to take down Trump, but Leavitt rips their playbook. Can the deep state strike the final blow before it all falls? They think they're the hunters, but they're actually the prey in Leavitt's righteous claws. The room was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. Reporters whispered to each other, some exchanged knowing smiles. Others adjusted their microphones, waiting for the moment to strike. The White House briefing room has seen its fair share of tense encounters, but today was different. It wasn't just tense, it was calculated. Karoline Leavitt could feel it before she even stepped onto the stage. This wasn't just another routine briefing, where reporters played their usual partisan games. This time, there was an edge sharper than before, a coordination that felt too smooth, too prepared. The scattered murmurs weren't the usual press corps banter. They carried weight, like a courtroom before a verdict, like a trap moments before it snaps shut. Miss Leavitt, CNN's reporter began, voice smooth but sharp. Given the latest economic downturn and, well, this, he gestured to the screen as it flickered on. Can you explain why the White House appears to be suppressing critical economic data? The screen showed a leaked internal email. We cannot disclose this yet. The numbers look bad. Murmurs spread. The coordination was clear. CNN had launched the attack, and AP was moving in for the kill. This email, the AP reporter pushed, suggests the administration is hiding the truth. Can you confirm its authenticity? Microphones clicked. Cameras zoomed in. Leavitt inhaled slowly, then leaned slightly forward. CNN, she said, why don't you read the next few lines? Or do you only show the part that fits your story? A flicker of hesitation. Well, the rest isn't relevant to... Not relevant. Her voice sliced through the room. That's convenient, because I have the full email right here. She lifted the document. Shall I read it, or would you like to? The CNN reporter froze. She didn't wait. We cannot disclose this yet. The numbers look bad, but projections show a full recovery within 2 months. We should wait until we have the complete data before making a public statement. The silence that followed was deafening. Leavitt set the paper down. Context, she said flatly. Funny how your network always seems to lose it. For a moment, she had control. Then came the counterstrike. Miss Leavitt, MSNBC's correspondent cut in, voice sharp. Perhaps you'd like to address the 15 federal injunctions issued against Trump's policies in the last 24 hours? A collective shift. The real attack had begun. That's more than Biden faced in a year, he pressed. Will the administration acknowledge the courts are rejecting Trump's agenda? More voices piled on. How does the White House justify this legal resistance? Will Trump defy the rulings? Leavitt stood firm, but the pressure was suffocating. She had just exposed CNN's deception, but MSNBC had immediately flipped the narrative, blindsiding her with the 15 federal injunctions against Trump's policies. The press smelled blood, and now they were closing in. Miss Leavitt, MSNBC's reporter pressed, his voice oozing with confidence. Were you aware of these injunctions before stepping onto this stage? Or was the White House keeping you in the dark? Leavitt tightened her grip on the podium. She knew what they wanted. A stumble, hesitation, even a flicker of doubt. Instead, she exhaled slowly and met the MSNBC reporter's gaze head-on. Interesting, she said, her voice razor-sharp. Suddenly, the media cares about judicial overreach. Where was this concern when Biden trampled over the Constitution for 4 years? The room shifted. Some reporters stiffened in their seats. Others exchanged uneasy glances. I'm not surprised, she continued. When a Republican president tries to enforce the law, we get injunctions. When a Democrat does the same, or worse, the media looks the other way. The MSNBC reporter leaned forward. Are you suggesting these judges are politically motivated? Leavitt didn't blink. I'm saying the American people can see exactly what's happening. They elected President Trump to secure the border, protect American jobs, and put America first. These injunctions, they're a last-ditch effort to stop him from doing what the voters sent him here to do. A murmur ran through the room. The attack had backfired for now. But just as Leavitt prepared to push further, the atmosphere shifted. Phones buzzed in unison. Screens lit up. A fresh headline flashed across the monitors. Breaking. Federal judge blocks Trump's immigration crackdown. The timing was too perfect. Leavitt's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a media ambush. This was real-time warfare. The room erupted. Miss Leavitt, how does the White House respond to this ruling? Will Trump comply or defy the courts? Is this proof that the administration is overstepping its authority? Chaos. The press wasn't asking questions. They were declaring victory. Leavitt squared her shoulders. She couldn't afford to show weakness. This ruling just came down moments ago, she said, her voice steady. And yet, here you all are, fully prepared to frame it as a defeat before we've even had a chance to respond, almost like you knew this was coming. A heavy silence followed. She scanned the room. The media isn't covering the news. You're coordinating it. The energy shifted again. The press had expected her to be caught off guard, but now they were the ones feeling exposed. Leavitt leaned forward. Here's what I'll say. This administration isn't backing down. The courts may try to stop us. The media may try to manipulate the public. But President Trump was elected to fight for the American people, and that's exactly what he's going to do. The silence after Leavitt's final words didn't last. The momentary shift in momentum had unsettled the press. But they weren't about to let her walk away unscathed. The game was still in play, and they had their next move ready. MSNBC's reporter didn't miss a beat. Miss Leavitt, let's be clear. Are you accusing the judiciary of working against the administration? Are you suggesting the courts aren't independent? The tone was sharp, calculated. It was a setup, and Leavitt knew it. She couldn't fall into the trap of directly attacking the judiciary. Not when the cameras were rolling, not when millions were watching. But if she dodged, the press would spin it as weakness. She took a measured breath. I'm suggesting that when the same judges who had no problem with overreaches in the past suddenly discover their constitutional duty, the second President Trump takes office, the American people have a right to ask questions. The room was buzzing. She had given them just enough to chew on, enough for the media to twist, but also enough for viewers at home to recognize the hypocrisy. But she wasn't in the clear yet. Another reporter from AP jumped in. So is this White House planning to fight these injunctions, or will the president comply? Leavitt knew the phrasing was intentional. If she said the White House would fight, they'd paint Trump as lawless. If she said he'd comply, they'd call it a humiliating defeat. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We will follow the legal process, as we always have, but make no mistake, President Trump will not allow political operatives in robes to override the will of the voters. A murmur spread. It was a subtle escalation, one the media could pounce on, but also a statement that reaffirmed Trump's authority. Leavitt could feel herself regaining ground, but the press wasn't finished. CNN's correspondent, his smirk returning, pushed forward. Miss Leavitt, you talk about political operatives, but isn't it true that President Trump has appointed judges himself? Are you saying his own judicial picks are part of this supposed conspiracy? The question was designed to create division, to force her to either attack Trump's own nominees or backpedal on her claim. Leavitt's mind raced. She knew what they wanted. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make the room hang on her next words. I'm saying that the deep state runs deeper than any one administration, and those who have spent years entrenched in Washington have no intention of letting go of their power. The American people see it. They know exactly who is fighting for them and who is fighting against them. The room was tense now. This was no longer about the injunctions alone. She had widened the battlefront. But just as she thought she had steadied the ship, another notification lit up across the screens. Breaking leaked DOJ memo. White House discussed challenging court rulings. Gasps, whispers, a collective energy shift. Leavitt felt her stomach tighten. Another perfectly timed breaking news drop, designed to knock her off balance. MSNBC wasted no time. Miss Leavitt, how do you respond to reports that the administration is considering ignoring these injunctions altogether? Has the president privately discussed defying the courts? The press had been waiting for this. They weren't just questioning her now. They were setting the stage for a full-blown crisis narrative. Leavitt gripped the podium. I have not seen this memo, but I find it interesting how conveniently these leaks happen at moments like this. She let the words settle, then she delivered the blow. The only people who seem to have advanced knowledge of these rulings and leaks are sitting in this room. A heavy silence followed. She had turned the tables. Again. The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to drown out even the constant shutter clicks of cameras. The press had spent the past 30 minutes trying to pin Leavitt against the wall, but now for the first time, they were the ones scrambling. She saw it in the way the CNN reporter shifted uncomfortably in his seat, in the way MSNBC's correspondent's lips pressed together, as if biting back a response. They hadn't expected her to throw the accusation back at them. Leavitt let the moment stretch, just long enough for the weight of her words to settle in. Then she leaned forward, gripping the podium. So tell me, should I be answering your questions, or should we be asking how these leaks keep finding their way to your inboxes before they're even public? The press room was no longer as eager to fire off their next question. The momentum had shifted, and then another interruption. A voice from the back of the room, one she hadn't expected. Miss Leavitt, I think you'll want to see this. A low murmur ran through the room as heads turned. The reporter wasn't from CNN, nor from MSNBC. It was a newer outlet, one that hadn't fully pledged allegiance to the establishment media. He wasn't holding a phone, he was holding a printed email. That was enough to make Leavitt's breath hitch. Printed? That meant this wasn't just a Twitter post or a breaking news notification. Someone had something. Something physical, something real. The reporter stepped forward. This just leaked. It's an internal CNN email instructing its producers on how to frame today's press briefing. The room erupted. Gasps, whispered curses. Some reporters were already pulling out their phones, likely trying to confirm or deny what had just been dropped in their laps. Leavitt knew she had to move fast. She turned to the reporter. Read it. The journalist hesitated only for a second, then lifted the paper. If Leavitt dodges, press harder. If she pushes back, question whether the White House is fueling a constitutional crisis. Frame it as Trump versus democracy. Do not engage on specifics. Stay on broader themes of lawlessness. The reaction was instantaneous. MSNBC's correspondent turned red. The CNN reporter who had been leading the charge earlier suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Some reporters in the back exchanged panicked glances, realizing that their credibility was unraveling before millions of live viewers. Leavitt could have smiled. She could have basked in the moment. But instead, she simply exhaled and looked back at the room. So, she said, voice even, who exactly is playing politics with the news? No one answered. Leavitt took her time, letting the silence speak for itself. Then, just as she was about to capitalize on the moment, yet another notification flashed across the monitors. Breaking. White House calls press enemies of the people. In leaked discussion, Leavitt's blood ran cold. They were counterattacking in real time. The MSNBC reporter found his voice again. Miss Leavitt, how do you respond to this? Are we enemies of the people? Leavitt clenched her jaw. She knew how they would spin this. She could already see the headlines. Press secretary declares war on free press. She had one shot to control the narrative. She met the reporter's gaze. The American people will decide who's working in their best interests. And judging by what we've seen here today, they have their answer. For a brief moment, the room was frozen. The weight of Leavitt's words hung over them like a storm cloud, heavy and impossible to ignore. The press, usually so quick to pounce, hesitated. They had been the predators at the start of this briefing. Now they were the ones on defense. Then everything changed. A side door at the edge of the briefing room cracked open. A figure stepped through, moving with sharp purpose. Leavitt didn't even have to turn around, she already knew. The press room exploded. A flurry of gas, microphones adjusting, cameras scrambling to focus. President Donald J. Trump had just entered the room. The moment he appeared behind Leavitt, the press broke into full-blown chaos. Mr. President, are you here to confirm? Mr. President, did the White House really call us? Sir, are you prepared to address the injunctions against your administration? Trump ignored them all. He walked straight to the podium, nodding at Leavitt, who stepped aside with a slight smirk. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, Trump pulled a document from his jacket and held it up for the cameras. Silence. The energy shifted in an instant. The seal on the document was unmistakable. A freshly signed executive order. Trump placed the document on the podium. His voice, steady but sharp, cut through the chaos like a blade. Effective immediately, he said, tapping the paper. My administration is enforcing the largest mass deportation of criminal illegals in American history. The reporters gasped. Trump continued, never breaking eye contact with the cameras. The press can play their games. The courts can try to stall me. But at the end of the day, my job is to protect the American people. And let me tell you something. He leaned in slightly, his voice deep and unwavering. Nothing is going to stop me from doing that. The reporters were in shock. The executive order had been signed during the very press conference where they thought they were dismantling the administration. Leavitt stole a glance at the stunned journalists in the room. They had walked into this briefing thinking they were setting the trap. Instead, they had just been outmaneuvered on live television. CNN's correspondent finally found his voice. Mr. President, are you saying this was planned in advance? Did you know this ruling was coming? Trump chuckled, that unmistakable, confident laugh. Let's just say, he said, eyes glinting, I've been in this business long enough to know how the game works. MSNBC's reporter jumped in. Sir, do you expect this executive order to hold, given the number of legal challenges your administration is facing? Trump didn't hesitate. Expect it? He said. It's already happening. Planes are leaving the tarmac as we speak. The room erupted. Some reporters shouted over each other. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how Trump had just flipped the entire media narrative on its head in real time. Leavitt turned slightly, watching Trump as he stood tall at the podium. She had spent the last hour fighting back the media's relentless attacks, holding the line against their narratives. The briefing room was chaos. Reporters were shouting over each other, some still scrambling to process what had just happened. Trump had flipped the script in real time, blindsiding the press, the courts, and the entire political establishment in front of millions of viewers. But it wasn't over yet. From the back of the room, another voice cut through the noise. Not a question, a statement. Mr. President, the media is not just reporting the news anymore. They're engineering it. The words came from a reporter not aligned with the mainstream outlets, one of the few who hadn't spent the past hour trying to take Leavitt down. The room shifted toward him as he held up his phone. An internal CNN email just leaked, he said, voice steady but firm. It instructs producers on exactly how to spin this briefing, before it even started. Gasps, more scrambling. Journalists grabbing their phones trying to confirm the claim before it spread beyond their control. Trump folded his arms. Well, 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 he said, amusement flashing in his eyes. Let's hear it. The reporter cleared his throat, reading straight from the leaked email. If Trump surprises the press, shift to emergency coverage. Frame the executive order as reckless and unconstitutional. Emphasize judicial pushback. Do not let the administration dictate the narrative. This is an opportunity to paint Trump as an authoritarian. The briefing room imploded. Leavitt's pulse quickened as she watched CNN's correspondent freeze, his face draining of color. The rest of the press corps was already divided, some checking their own sources, others exchanging frantic whispers. MSNBC's lead reporter gripped his notepad so tightly his knuckles turned white. The message was clear. They had never been here for the truth. They had already decided what the story would be before Trump even walked into the room. Trump didn't need to say a word, but of course he did. Well, folks, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, I guess we finally know who the real threat to democracy is. The moment was nuclear. The press, usually loud, aggressive, relentless, had nothing to say. A crack had just formed in their foundation. The deep state's media arm was fracturing, live on air. Leavitt seized the opportunity. She turned back to the press corps, her voice sharp as steel. This is what we've been saying all along, she said. You don't report the news, you create it. You don't hold power accountable, you protect it. Silence. The tension was suffocating. Then, the breaking point. One of CNN's younger reporters stood up suddenly, his face tense with frustration. His own network had just been exposed, and now he had a choice to make. Go down with the sinking ship, or jump. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered under his breath. Then louder, I refuse to be part of this propaganda machine. With that, he ripped off his press badge, dropped it on the floor, and walked out. More gasps, then movement. Other reporters, lower-level ones, shifting in their seats, their confidence shattered. Leavitt could see it, the division, the beginning of the end. The media was cracking. CNN and MSNBC's top reporters were panicking now, trying to regain control. But there was nothing they could say that would undo what had just happened. Trump tapped the executive order again. This is happening, he said, nodding toward the cameras. No amount of spin is going to change that. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a press room in shambles. Leavitt followed. The White House briefing room was in ruins. Not physically, but structurally. The very foundation of the media's control over the narrative had cracked open on live television. Leavitt and Trump had left, but the chaos they unleashed was only just beginning. Inside CNN's headquarters, panic had set in. Producers barked orders through headsets, scrambling to salvage their coverage. Reporters whispered furiously in hallways, some questioning how they had just been outmaneuvered so publicly. And then, the numbers started rolling in. One by one, news directors and executives checked their screens, watching in horror as their live audience numbers plummeted. In just 1 hour, CNN had lost over 500,000 viewers. MSNBC wasn't faring any better. Twitter, Truth Social, and Telegram were on fire with clips from the press briefing, exposing their manipulation in real time. The hashtag number CNN is dead had already begun trending worldwide. For the first time in years, the press had lost control of the story. The conference room inside CNN was packed. Executives sat at the head of the table, glaring at the numbers on the giant screen. Ratings graphs nosediving. Social media mocking them relentlessly. Even loyal viewers were questioning their credibility. This is a disaster, one executive muttered, rubbing his temples. This wasn't supposed to happen, another snapped. How the hell did that email get leaked? The room fell silent. No one had an answer. A producer hesitated before speaking. We've lost a reporter. The executives turned in unison. What? The producer swallowed hard. James Renner. He quit. On air. Someone cursed under their breath. The panic was growing. If one reporter had the guts to walk away, how many more would follow? We need to get ahead of this, one of the senior anchors insisted. We push back hard. We say Trump is weaponizing disinformation, that this was a staged attack against the press. A few nodded, but the damage had already been done. The leaked email had been real. The executive order had been real. The media's collapse was happening in real time. At MSNBC, executives were already preparing damage control interviews. Calls were made to left-wing politicians and legal analysts, desperate for someone to frame the briefing as a crisis. They needed a new villain, a bigger distraction. Within minutes, talking points flooded through the network. Trump was creating a constitutional crisis. Leavitt was pushing dangerous rhetoric. Was this the end of democracy as we know it? But none of it was landing. The viewers weren't buying it anymore. And then the unthinkable happened. A major MSNBC advertiser pulled out, citing concerns over their credibility. The internal email circulated among executives. We can't align our brand with a news outlet that's actively misleading its audience. We need stability, not scandal. It was only one advertiser, but it was the first crack in the dam. Back at the White House, Leavitt sat in her office, watching everything unfold. CNN was bleeding, MSNBC was scrambling. The mainstream media's grip was loosening, and yet she knew this wasn't over. The deep state, the courts, the press, they weren't going down without a fight. She glanced at her phone, a new message. Be ready, they're planning something bigger. Leavitt exhaled. The battle for the truth was far from over. Leavitt tapped her fingers against the desk, eyes locked on the phone screen. The message was simple. Be ready. They're planning something bigger. But the weight behind it was crushing. The media was already in freefall, but the deep state wasn't going to let this defeat stand. They were about to strike back. Outside, the White House was buzzing with reporters still trying to spin the fallout of Trump's press conference. Inside, a war room was forming. Trump's closest advisors, including Leavitt, were gathering intel on what was coming next. The leaks, the collapsing viewership, the exposed media narratives. None of it was random. Someone had orchestrated a massive operation to take them down, and when that failed, they had pivoted to a new attack. A knock at the door. One of Trump's senior aides stepped in, his expression tight. They're making their move, he said, handing her a tablet. CNN and MSNBC are running with a new leak. Leavitt's stomach tightened as she scanned the screen. Breaking, high-ranking Trump official tied to deep state conspiracy. She clenched her jaw. They weren't just going after Trump anymore. They were trying to plant a traitor inside his administration. The article was vague, filled with unnamed sources and insider claims that one of Trump's closest allies was secretly working against him. No names, no real evidence, just enough to create doubt, to stir paranoia, to force an internal collapse. Leavitt exhaled sharply. They want us to turn on each other, she muttered. The aide nodded. That's the play. They saw the media strategy failing, so now they're trying to break us from the inside. A chill ran through her. The press would frame it as chaos within Trump's administration. CNN was already running panels discussing how Trump's paranoia was destabilizing the White House. MSNBC was asking if the GOP would need to intervene to save the country from Trump's rogue leadership. It was all smoke, all distraction. But the danger was real. If the White House didn't respond, the story would fester. If they did, it would feed the narrative of paranoia. Either way, the deep state won. Leavitt took a breath, steadying herself. We need to flip this on them. Turn the story upside down. The aide hesitated. How? She picked up her phone. We show the real traitors. If they want to talk about infiltration, let's talk about how many deep state operatives are still embedded in the system, how many bureaucrats, judges, and career officials are working to sabotage this administration. She tapped into her encrypted files, pulling up a list of names. We go public, she said. The aide's eyes widened. Are you sure? This could escalate. Leavitt looked up, her expression firm. It's already escalated. Leavitt didn't hesitate. The deep state had played its hand, and now it was her turn. The press had spent the last 24 hours running wild with their Trump official tied to deep state conspiracy, planting the idea of betrayal, hoping to fracture the administration from within. But they had made a critical mistake. They underestimated her. She walked swiftly down the White House corridor, phone in hand, her mind racing through the plan. The list of names in her encrypted file wasn't just theoretical speculation. It was concrete proof of bureaucrats, intelligence officials, and even members of the judiciary who had been quietly working against Trump's America First agenda. Some were career operatives embedded long before Trump took office. Others were supposed allies who had made backdoor deals with media outlets and activist judges to sabotage his policies. She stepped into the communications war room. Aides and strategists turned as she entered, sensing the urgency in her presence. The senior advisor from earlier raised an eyebrow. What's the move? Leavitt placed her phone on the table. We go public. The room was silent for a second. Then someone exhaled sharply. You mean release the names? She nodded. We don't just respond to their attack. We expose the entire network working against this administration. A strategist hesitated. That's a nuclear option. If we release names, they'll hit back even harder. Leavitt didn't flinch. They're already hitting us. They want Trump to be paranoid, to start questioning his own people, to make the administration implode from within. We don't play into their hands, we turn the paranoia on them. Make them the ones scrambling, looking over their shoulders. Another aide leaned in. How do we frame it? Leavitt pulled up a draft statement. She had been preparing for this moment. We announce an internal review into the systemic infiltration of unelected bureaucrats within federal agencies. We highlight how previous administrations, especially the Obama and Biden years, planted operatives in key institutions to block real reform. We expose the media's role in collaborating with these insiders to create political crises. And we make one thing clear: Trump isn't hunting for traitors. The traitors are about to be hunted. The silence in the room wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. Then one by one, heads nodded. They understood. Someone picked up a phone. "I'll get the speechwriters moving." Another turned to his laptop. "We can get this on Truth Social in under an hour." The senior advisor exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Once this goes live, there's no turning back." Leavitt met his gaze, her expression steely. There was never a way back to begin with. Within 30 minutes, the official White House statement was drafted, vetted, and prepared for release. But Leavitt wasn't done yet. She had one more move to make. She grabbed her phone and sent a direct message to a trusted conservative journalist. "Breaking story. Check your email." CNN and MSNBC had spent the last 24 hours painting Trump as the paranoid leader unraveling under pressure. But now the narrative had been ripped from their hands. Instead of defending against accusations of internal betrayal, the administration had gone on the attack, exposing the names of entrenched deep state operatives working behind the scenes to sabotage Trump's policies. The headlines flipped almost instantly. White House launches internal probe into deep state sabotage. Trump administration to investigate political operatives in government agencies. Media scrambles as White House exposes coordinated attacks. Leavitt sat back in her chair, watching as the media floundered. They had been prepared to drive Trump into a self-destructive witch hunt, but now they were the ones under scrutiny. But she knew they wouldn't go down quietly. Within hours, the pushback began. The New York Times ran a desperate editorial claiming the investigation was a dangerous abuse of executive power. MSNBC rolled out legal analysts warning that the purge could violate constitutional rights. Congressional Democrats called for hearings, accusing Trump of targeting government employees for political reasons. Leavitt expected it all. She had seen it play out before. Every time Trump fought back, the establishment screeched louder. But something was different this time. The usual unified front of the media wasn't holding together. Some journalists, even some from mainstream outlets, were starting to ask real questions. How did CNN's internal email leak? Why were so many government officials actively working against policies that voters had supported? Was there really a coordinated effort to block Trump's agenda from within? The doubt was setting in, and for the first time in decades, the deep state had lost control of the narrative. The final blow that night, Leavitt sat in her office watching the coverage unfold. The plan had worked, but the battle wasn't over. Her phone buzzed, a message from an undisclosed source. "We found the leak." Her heart pounded. They had suspected it for days, that someone inside the administration had been feeding the media and the court's information in real time, trying to outmaneuver Trump at every step. She opened the file attached to the message. The name stared back at her. A high-ranking official, someone trusted, someone deeply embedded in the system. She exhaled sharply. The war against Trump wasn't just external, it was happening inside the White House itself. And now she knew exactly who had been orchestrating it. She locked her phone and stood up. Tomorrow everything would change. The deep state wasn't done fighting, but neither was she.